For more than 6 decades, the through line is brutally simple. Cuban and Cuban-American lives have been treated as expendable and negotiable, useful as symbols and proxies, but rarely defended when it actually costs power anything. At the Bay of Pigs, Cuban exiles were trained, armed, and explicitly promised air cover, then denied even a couple of decisive airstrikes when they were already on the beach under fire. The same government that later sent Marines into the Dominican Republic to prevent another Cuba, invaded Grenada and Panama, and now postures carrier groups off Venezuela, could not risk 2 or 3 fighter sorties to keep Castro's planes from massacring Brigade 2506. The result was a clear signal. Washington would invoke the fear of another Cuba to justify interventions everywhere else, but it would not take the risks necessary to free the actual Cuba it used as a cautionary tale. That logic carried straight into the 1990s. On February 24, 1996, Brothers to the Rescue Cessnas, civilian U.S.-registered aircraft with American citizens of Cuban descent on board, were hunted down over the straits by Cuban MiGs in full view of U.S. radar and even civilian traffic, including a cruise ship close enough for passengers to see smoke and contrails and take photos. No U.S. fighters ever appeared between the MiGs and those slow Cessnas. The most powerful air force on Earth accepted that those 4 men could be killed rather than risk a direct confrontation. Afterward, the pattern repeated. Diplomatic condemnations, partial justice on paper, criminal indictments that never led to a Cuban officer in a U.S. cell, limited civil compensation fought over in court while U.S. lawyers stepped in to protect frozen assets and foreign policy interests, and eventually even a key Cuban intelligence convict traded away in a normalization deal. In practice, the system did not treat the shoot-down as an intolerable attack on its citizens. It treated it as an incident to be managed, and managed in ways that preserved leverage with Havana over the full justice the families sought. The same selectivity appears in the way the JFK story and Oswald's Mexico City trip were handled. There is no serious doubt that Oswald had contact with Soviet and Cuban diplomatic missions in Mexico City shortly before Dallas, and that U.S. intelligence knew much more than it initially shared about those visits, the surveillance on those compounds, and its own internal confusion. Instead of full candor, key parts of that record were obscured or dribbled out over decades. Any line of inquiry that might have forced a direct reckoning with Oswald's Cuban and Soviet contacts was politically dangerous, so ambiguity and suppression were safer. In the cultural sphere, however, films and narratives have had no hesitation painting anti-Castro exiles as volatile, shadowy, and suspect. Convenient villains in someone else's story. Once again, when the truth might implicate Castro or embarrass Washington, it is blurred. When blame can be shifted onto Cuban exiles, it is amplified. Even when Cuban Americans are not being shot at, their status is treated as conditional. Under Obama's opening, U.S. licensed cruise lines began service to Cuba under a regime rule that Cuban-born people could not arrive by sea. U.S. corporations initially went along and told American citizens of Cuban origin that they could not book tickets because of where they were born. Only after Cuban Americans sued and publicly exposed the discrimination did the companies reverse course and Havana grudgingly adjust its rule. The default posture was clear. The desire to do business and stage a political opening came first. The equal treatment of Cuban American citizens was negotiable until it became a legal and public relations problem. The same hierarchy plays out at home in Miami. Cuban-majority neighborhoods like Flagami, Westchester, and the western part of the city have carried high tax burdens for decades, live under flight paths, and now face new stadium traffic and road fixes that threaten to choke off access to the only nearby hospitals. While marquee infrastructure, beautification, rail, and civic prestige projects land predictably in places like Brickell, downtown, Wynwood, Little River, and Doral. Crime statistics and arrest labels are easy to access and publicize, but detailed, disaggregated data on where code enforcement dollars, solid waste citations, and capital spending actually land by zip code is conveniently opaque or siloed. Cuban neighborhoods see code cars and citation books far more often than they see serious traffic calming, transit investment, or major public works. Residents who already carry the trauma of losing everything once in Cuba live with a rational fear that if they challenge city or county authorities too loudly, they could lose their homes again through fines, liens, or targeted enforcement. That fear is not only understood by local systems, it is quietly exploited. When you line it all up, the pattern is consistent. At Bay of Pigs and over the Straits, Cuban lives were the acceptable risk line, where air cover and jets became too politically costly. In the handling of Oswald's Cuban contacts, in the cruise discrimination episode, and in the long-term treatment of Cuban neighborhoods in Miami, Cuban and Cuban-American rights and safety are the variable that can be traded away to preserve appearances, diplomacy, business, or someone else's narrative. The slogan has been "No more Cubas" for 60 years, but the actual Cuba was never liberated. Its exiles were repeatedly used and abandoned, and the communities they built in the United States are still treated as buffers, revenue sources, and exceptions to the protections and respect that others can take for granted. Call it what it is: a glaring, systematic discrimination that has been normalized for so long that almost no one in power even bothers to hide it. For more than 60 years, Cuban and Cuban-American lives have been the one minority currency Washington and the media feel completely free to spend. Good enough to train and abandon at the Bay of Pigs, good enough to watch die in unescorted Cessnas, good enough to be excluded from cruise ships with a straight face, good enough to overtax, overfine, and ignore in places like Flagami and western Miami, but never important enough to protect, to liberate, or to invest in at the level given to others. And the culture around it is just as corrupt. The same media ecosystem that treats almost every other ethnic group as untouchable when it comes to stereotypes and slurs has no problem sneering at Miami hardliners, describing Cuban nationals, Cuban white privilege, when there is a crime, mocking old men with flags in Little Havana, and quietly suggesting that exiles are dangerous or politically irredeemable. In practice, Cuban Americans have become the one community it is socially safe to hate in polite company. Punished for being anti-communist, punished for voting the wrong way, punished for having the audacity to remember who took their country. That is not an accident, and it is not a misunderstanding. It is a long, unbroken policy choice: to use Cubans when they are useful, to discard them when they are inconvenient, and to ensure that no one with a national platform ever calls that double standard by its real name. If you see what is happening to Cuban Americans and to our neighborhoods, please don't just scroll past this. Help us expose a discrimination that has been quietly tolerated for more than 6 decades. Hit like, subscribe, and share this video with everyone you know. Then go one step further. Contact your city, county, state, and federal officials. Demand moratoriums on predatory fines and code enforcement until there is a full, transparent accounting of where the money comes from and where the investment goes. Demand accountability and equal infrastructure for Flagami, West Miami, and every Cuban majority neighborhood that has carried the tax burden while being left behind. Stop targeting the people who already lost everything once. Stop punishing those who never voted for the regime that stole their homeland and who watched the world forget Cuba and let it crumble. And please, stop punishing them for voting Republican. Disagreement at the ballot box is not a license to deny an entire community basic safety, infrastructure, and respect. We are not asking for special treatment. We are demanding that Cuban Americans finally be treated as full citizens, with the same protection, the same respect, and the same right to a future as anyone else. If you believe that's the minimum standard of justice, subscribe, share, and raise your voice now. Because silence is exactly what allowed this to go on for so long.